All right, some more examples of solving quadratic equations, and this is another trinomial. So we know the three ways to solve trinomials are either by, and this is from our last notes, if it's in the form ax squared plus bx plus c, and none of those are factors are zero, then we can either factor, which is how we did number 7, or complete the square, or use the quadratic formula. And we always try to factor first because that's the easiest. So if we take a look at this, can we factor? No, I'm not going to be able to find two numbers that multiply to give 1 and differ by 6. So since this is 1, and since a is 1, I could say over here, a is 1. Remember our form is ax squared plus bx plus c. Since a equals 1 and b is even, which is even, then this is a great candidate for completing the square. We want this to be 1 and this to be even. Then we would choose to use complete the square if we couldn't factor. That would be our next easiest method. Okay, so what are we going to do first? Well, this technique, we've covered this before. What we'll do is we'll add 1, so x squared plus 6x equals 1. Just add 1 to both sides. And then the square root of x squared is x, and what's half of 6? That's 3. And what we add is 3 squared, which is 9. So this is the process of completing the square. We've talked about that before. Now we know from our factoring, this is I think from factoring method 3 in our factoring videos. I think it's in video 2, but it's factoring method 3. This is a trinomial square, and it's going to factor to be a binomial square. It's a trinomial square or a perfect square trinomial. It's going to be a binomial squared. This sign goes here. Oops. And these numbers go in here. So it's going to be x and 3. And that's going to equal 1 plus 9, which is 10. And now we're back to some problems we saw earlier. If something squared equals 10, then that something equals plus or minus the square root of 10. So then if I subtract, I get x. If I subtract 3 from both sides, x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 10. All right? And you could leave it like that. So you got two possibilities. All right? You could say x equals negative 3 plus the square root of 10, or x equals negative 3 minus the square root of 10. And then if you want to approximate that, you could using the interpolation process we talked about. And there you go. Okay, so negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 10. Okay, so that's completing the square. All right, and then our last example here. 3x squared minus 5x minus 5 equals 0, another quadratic equation, and we know for this form, we know a is not equal to 1. It's equal to 3, so a is not equal to 1, and b is not even. All right, so we're not going to be able to complete the square, so we're reduced to the quadratic formula. And I think I've got some videos on basically doing the quadratic formula, so we'll just apply that. Remember, we identify, first of all, we write down the formula. X equals minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And what's a? A is going to be 3. B is going to be negative 5. And c is negative 5. Not a real good example there. Sorry about that. X equals, and I'll put a negative, and I'll leave parentheses here. So write your formula down without the data, and then input the data. So b is negative 5. So that's negative b squared. 4a is 3. And c is negative 5. And again, a is 3, so you put that in. B, A, C, A. Be very careful when you substitute. And after that's pretty easy. X equals, and negative times a negative is positive, so we got 5, plus or minus the square root. Negative 5 squared is 25. And a negative times a negative is a positive, that's nice. And then 4 times 3 is 12, 12 times 5 is 60. All over 2 times 3 is 6. And we can add that up, so we get x equals 5 plus or minus the square root of 85 all over 6. And there's your answer. All right. Oops. Is that okay? I know my plus or minus is a little bit high. Should be a little bit lower there, so I'll move it down for you. And that's what we got. Okay, so that's the quadratic formula. Always write the formula down and then leave spaces to substitute so you don't make mistakes. So that should give you a good oversight on how to deal with a variety of quadratic equations.